Okay, today we're going to do some canning. We've been canning for several years now, and our stores are running a little low, so today we're going to pressure can some pork stew. Now this pork loin, we bought 3 of these. We're going to can all 3 of them. I like pork. We like pork. And this pork loin cost us $2 a pound. And if you did this with beef, you pay $5 or $6 a pound. So, works out that I like pork. We're going to start by cutting these into about 3/4 by 3/4 cubes. We could raw pack this and just go straight to canning, because we have to process these cans for 90 minutes, and in 90 minutes you will thoroughly cook this pork if you wanted to raw pack it, but I don't. I like to brown it first, put it in my big pot, gives it a little better cooked flavor, so I brown it before I can it. And one of these pork loins will yield a whole lot of pork stew. And I'm going to be honest, we eat a lot of pork stew. So we just cut it into chunks, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/4 by 3/4. Probably should have sharpened my knife some before I started this. It'll work just fine. I don't trim any of the fat. That's the best part of it, really. Flavor. right, so I put the meat on the stove to start it browning. And while it's browning, we're going to cut potatoes and carrots. Now in our stew, we put pork, potato, carrots, and a little corn and some onion. Typically I try and cut these potatoes roughly the same size as we did the pork, but it really doesn't matter. They're going to cook all the way through, regardless of what size they are. These are some big old potatoes she brought home this time. While I'm doing this, I keep these potatoes in water to keep them from turning brown until we can get them in the jars. Time for the carrots. Now we don't peel our carrots because if you've ever peeled carrots, and then noticed by the time you get carrots peeled, you have as much carrot and peelings as you do left over in carrots. So we scrub our carrots with a scrubby. And we get everything that needs to be off without wasting so much carrot. This particular batch of carrots is a little on the fat side, so our carrots are going to be a little big this time, but that's all right. Just cut them a little thinner than usual. Some of these just gonna have to be quartered because they're getting really big. whatever carrots we have left over, we'll just can carrots. Okay, we got this pork just about brown the way we like it. Now, when you're canning food, you gotta can it in liquid. Some people go out and buy beef stock, meat stock, pork stock, chicken stock. I just add water here at the browning stage, and it doesn't hurt the browning, it doesn't hurt the meat, it doesn't make it bland, but it'll give you a stock to fill the jars the rest of the way. So you're basically making your own stock. Now, when I get done with this, I will can the rest of my meat stock. So next time we do it, I can add the stock in rather than just water. Now it's time to get the jars ready. Everybody says you need to boil these jars or put them in the oven and sterilize them. Well, I just put them in super hot water. And the only thing I'm worried about is the temperature differences causing breakage and such. We're gonna put the meat in, it's gonna be hot. We're gonna put the vegetables in, it's not gonna be hot. So rather than get these super hot, I get them as hot as my tap water gets. And our tap water gets hot enough where you can't put your hand in it. These jars are all clean. Those lids are all clean. Some of them have been used before and some of them are new. I do reuse these lids. I've never had a problem reusing the lids. They've always sealed. So people say you shouldn't reuse them because they won't seal. I say nonsense. They seal just fine as long as that gasket's in good shape. So they're already clean. We soak them in super hot water, and the lid's the same way. Okay, it's time to start jarring this stuff up. Now, these jars are pretty dang hot right now. I just want them to be hot enough to when I start putting that meat in there, it doesn't crack the glass from sudden temperature change. This is a jar grabber. You'll be needing one of those if you're going to be handling hot jars. Cannon funnel. This is the one you want. Ladle. You definitely want one of these ladles. Handy to hook on the pot. And they got a nice pointy end for getting in the corners of the pot. My scooper. I don't know what you call it. mix all this together, cook it before you jar it, but I like the consistency better by layering. We put about that much pork. Now we use the Presto pressure canner. I really like that canner. We'll go more into that in a minute. But that's a 23-quart canner, and we can do 7 quarts at a time, or we can do 14 by stacking them up. I don't generally stack them up because I don't need to, but if I wanted to do 14 quarts at a time, I absolutely could. Now we're going to start layering this stuff in here. And now a quart of pork stew will typically feed me at least twice, and more if you stretch it with rice or something else. I like potatoes and carrots. Lisa really likes the corn, so we put the corn in there too. Now I'm gonna layer this stuff up. Now that we have the ingredients in there that we want, we got to finish it off with liquid. And we're going to use the stock out of this pork that we browned. So it's basically going to be canned in pork stock. Now, that's where this fancy ladle comes in. I really like this ladle. We have the meat basically in water, or at least in its own broth. We also have all the other ingredients, potatoes, carrots, the onions, and the corn, soaking in water to keep them fresh until we get this done. Now, there's another benefit to keeping all the other components in water. When you're canning, you got to add the liquid to the jars. Well, when you get done adding the liquid, you have to debubble it. In other words, any bubbles in that jar, you need to work to the top. For all these ingredients by themselves are hydrophobic, meaning they don't want to get wet. So the benefit of soaking them all in water is you typically don't have problems with bubbles. So I typically don't have to debubble after I do this, but I'll show you what it is anyway, because everybody else in the world does it. It makes like it's very important. Now when we add the liquid to these jars, we have to leave what they call head space. Some people say 3/4, some people say 1 inch. I usually go about 1 inch. And that's the air space on top that is necessary to pressurize and seal these jars properly. Since I keep my ingredients submerged in water, I don't typically have to go back and debubble and then readjust because, like I said, we're not getting a lot of bubbles in there. I don't season this stuff as I go because once you get ready to eat it, you might want to go a different direction with it. So typically, when we're preparing it to eat, we'll season it. Now with this funnel in a wide mouth jar, the head space is typically right at the bottom of the funnel. So the head space you need, that makes it pretty easy. Pretty easy to judge your head space for those of us who can't just look and tell what 1 inch is. They do have the debubbling tool that every canner will own. That will give you a gauge if you need it. But the bottom of this funnel works pretty dang good for me. And since our ingredients are not hydrophobic, it's not going to change much when it's time to debubble. Gonna have to open some more stock to finish this out. That one pork loin will make approximately, I don't know, 12 or 14 quarts, which for me and Lisa is 24, 28 meals, because we do get 2 meals out of each one of these. I'll spend a few hours canning this stuff, like today, and Lisa and I will be able to eat full meals that literally take 5 minutes to prepare for a month, which is why I think everybody should be doing this. Now it's time to get the lids on. Before we put the lids on, we're supposed to debubble. This is a debubbler. You're supposed to run this down the sides and make sure that there's no bubbles trapped down there. Now the truth is, not really a big deal if there are, but you want to get the right amount of headspace. So if you got bubbles trapped, you want to debubble this stuff. Now I don't debubble because I don't get trapped bubbles because all my ingredients come out of water. And it really helps tremendously with that. These are the lids. Before we put the lids on here, we have to make sure that these rims are clean. If those rims aren't clean, you stand a chance that they won't seal properly. So what they say do is get some vinegar on a paper towel and go around and clean each one of these rim where the lid is going to seat. Now, I always do this, but I have never, and I'm talking never, had a problem with a jar sealing. Some people worry about leaving the little fat in the jar. That has never been a problem for me. Now here's the part that is a little tricky. I have these lids soaking in really hot water. This fancy little tool is a magnet used for picking up these hot lids out of the water, because again, theoretically we're supposed to have them in boiling water to sterilize them. Well, I'm here to tell you, processing these jars, they'll be sterile as they ever need to be, as long as they started out clean. That water is hot. Now this is the part that requires a little finesse. Everybody on the planet says these need to go on finger tight. Well, everybody's got different fingers. So here's the problem. If you put them on too tight, when we process them, the hot gases can't escape, and you'll bend up your lid and it probably won't seal. If you don't put them on tight enough, when they start to cool and the vacuum seal tries to happen, you may not have had it sealed good enough to get it to seal. Now, I've been very lucky with this. I've never had a problem having my jars sealed. Now, there's been a time or two when I've had a problem. Fired. You are fired. There's been a time or two when I've gotten them on too tight, and it's bent up the lid. But I've never had a problem with them sealing. So what I do is I go till they stop and a little more. Go till they stop with little or no pressure, and then a little more. Till they stop and just a little more. Everybody has a different opinion on how it should be done. Finger tight, well, that's finger tight if you got weak fingers, and that's finger tight if you're doing it too hard. So till they stop and a little more. till they stop with little or no pressure, and then a little more. Till they stop and a little more. It doesn't take much pressure. And those are ready to go in the canner. Now this here is the canner I use, and this is the canner I like. It's a 23 quart Presto with a twist lock lid. You can do up to 14 quarts at a time with this canner. This is what they call a dial canner because it depends on the pressure gauge with the weight that comes with it. You have to get your heat adjusted just perfect to where at my altitude I need 11 pounds of pressure. If it gets a little hot, it goes a little high. Gets a little cool, it goes a little low. Now theoretically, if you let it get a little bit low, theoretically you're supposed to start the timer all the way from the beginning. You really don't want to get it a little hot, but you definitely don't want to let it get a little low. Now there's about 2.5 inches of water in the bottom of this thing. I ran it out of my tap just as hot as I could get it. And now I'm going to put it on high and get that stuff started heating up. This 23 quart Presto will do 7 jars at a time. And that's all I ever do, honestly. I don't need to stack them up. Now, if I was canning a bunch of small jams and jellies, I may stack them up, but there's really no need in my mind. Okay, so here's the theory. We're going to kill all the spores that cause diseases, illnesses. We have to get this up to 245 degrees or so. Water boils at 212 degrees unless you put it under pressure, which is the whole point of the pressure canner. Now, when you look in your FDA food preservation guide, they'll tell you for a dial canner, it's 11 pounds at my altitude. I think it's, between 1 and 2,000 or up to 2,000. I'm not sure. You want it at 10 pounds of pressure. If you're at higher elevations, you may need more pressure, 15 pounds of pressure. Usually 10 pounds is what you'll need till you get into higher elevations. Everybody I know is at lower elevations. But we have to bring this, when you check the FDA guide, they'll tell you if you have a dial canner, you want it at 11 pounds. Now that's for margin of error purposes. If you have a weighted canner, pressure canner, they'll tell you 10 is good. The thing about the weighted canner is the weight on the weighted canner is specifically designed to let the pressure out at 10 pounds. Now this Presto pressure canner comes with this weight. That weight's too heavy for that, so this is considered a dial canner. And you have to really closely monitor the heat to keep the pressure at 11 pounds. Go to 12, no problem, but you're not supposed to drop below 10. So you don't want to go below 10. Now, when you buy this aftermarket weight for this Presto canner, it becomes a weighted canner, so that we know that this weight is going to release any pressure above 10 pounds. Now we can use this as a weighted canner. I bought this some time back. I had done a lot of canning with this weight, standing here babysitting the heat levels. And I found this one, and they wanted $25 for this little weight. And I ain't gonna lie, that's too much, but that's the best money I ever spent. Like that, it's 15-pound weight. Take off this top weight, and it becomes a 10-pound weight. Now we call this Tiny Dancer because she starts dancing when the pressure hits 10 pounds and jiggling, and she lets the pressure out. Now what we're going to do is we're going to bring this up to temperature. We're going to get it just as hot as we can, and it's going to start blowing steam. When it starts blowing steam, we have to vent it for 10 minutes. In other words, let it just blow that steam out because we're trying to replace all the air in there with steam. And until this is blowing a steady stream of steam, you don't have all the air out. So they say get it steady and then give it 10 minutes. I just get it to where it's steady. This is a pop-off valve. If your canner should become overpressurized, this will blow out and let it release so your thing doesn't explode. So that's a safety feature. Now, I always turn that to the back, so if it does pop off, it pops off back there instead of in my face. I see a lot of people turning this around and putting this in the back and bringing this in the front. Now this is a pressure stopper. When it starts to get under pressure, this will pop up and hold the pressure. After we get done with our 90 minutes of processing time, everything has different processing time, but most of the things we can, 90 minutes of processing time. After this gets done processing and all the pressure, we've reduced the heat, turned the heat off, and all the pressure has come down, this thing will sit. This thing will drop back down. When that drops back down, you're okay to go ahead and take the weight off. But you must not pull that weight off until this is back down. Because if this is still up, there's still some pressure in there. If you release that pressure in there, you actually stand a bit of a chance of blowing out your jars, or blowing out your lids, or blowing out something you really don't want to blow out. So not only does it have to be back down to zero, this has to also be sat back down. So now what we're going to do is wait for this to come up to temperature. It's going to take probably 10 minutes for this to start blowing steam, and then another 10 minutes for it to get steady enough to go ahead and start the processing time by setting. We set the weight on here and wait till it comes up to 10 pounds, and that's when you start your timer. Set the weight on, this will come up to 10 pounds, start your timer. Okay, it's been heating up for about 10 minutes. As you can see, it's blowing steam. The pressure plug has popped up. and it's holding the seal. But you can see that steam isn't steady. That means there's still air inside, and we need to vent that out. Now from this point, we're supposed to vent it for 10 minutes, which is about how long it'll be before that's steaming steady enough to indicate that there's no more air inside, no more air inside the pot, but it's all steam. Okay, now it's been about 10 minutes and there's a steady flow of steam coming out. All the air is out of the inside of the pot, out of the canner. Now we're going to put our weight on. Now if you watch here, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but if you watch here, that needle will start registering pressure. Matter of fact, let me see if you can see it. So you can watch real time how long it takes. Now, straight up and down, it's going to be at 10 degrees. 10 pounds, that bait. And at 10 pounds, Tiny Dancer's going to start jiggling. Well, it's at 3 pounds. Maybe it's too boring to watch. It's going to take about 5 minutes. Alright, we're getting just about 10 pounds now. And Tiny Dancer ought to start dancing any time. There she goes. It's a little above 10 pounds, which is fine. But you see she's dancing and she's letting the pressure out. Now we can go up here and turn the heat down because we don't need that much heat to sustain 10 pounds of pressure. Now I got an electric range here and it's on high. I'm going to start by turning it down to about 6. Nah, 5. Which is half speed. Now by the time I get it adjusted right, it'll be down to 3, between 3 and 4, and it'll maintain 10 pounds. But the beauty about the weighted canner is that if I miss the heat a little bit, it's not a problem. Tiny Dancer will let the steam out, will let the pressure out, and keep it right around 10 or 11 pounds, which is perfectly acceptable. But she's dancing pretty hard right now, and we don't need that much pressure. So we're gonna let it cool off here a little bit. And now's when I should have set the timer. $90. And I'll keep an eye on the heat. Make sure it's hot enough to keep it at 10 or 11 pounds. But that aftermarket weight is absolutely a game changer. Now those all-American pressure canners, they're pretty nice canners, pretty well built. But they cost between $350 and $400. And to me, that's just ridiculous. And I really like this Presto canner because it's got a twist-on lid. You ain't got to mess with all the toggles. Got the pop-off in the back for safety reasons. It's well-made canners. I really like the twist-on lid feature. There's a gasket on there. That's gasket's been on there for years, and I do have a spare in case it wants to go out. But this pressure canner you can get for, I don't know, 130, 140, 150 now. Less than half the price of one of those All-Americans. And I personally don't see the point of messing with those toggles when this twist-on lid works perfect. And you can see Tiny Dancer is barely dancing now. Still working. Every now and then it'll let out a little pressure. Still at 11 pounds. But I'll still keep monitoring the heat to make sure I don't get it too low. If you do go too low, you're supposed to start the timer back over, but I call nonsense on that. Get it back to pressure and resume the time. You're not gonna, the whole point of this is to get the very center of those jars up to 245 degrees. Getting a tiny bit low on pressure is not going to cause a problem that you should need to start your timer all the way back over. But here's a better idea. These aftermarket weights have come down from $25 to about $10 for whatever reason. There's no reason not to get one. I reduced the heat to 4. And that'd be plenty. I could probably get away with 3, but why? The Tiny Dancer, it don't matter if you got a little hot, she's gonna be releasing the pressure as needed. So, we'll let that work for 90 minutes and come finish up. All right, it's been 90 minutes. You can see Tiny Dancer really dancing, even though I've got it on level 3 on the burner. Now we're going to turn the heat off. Now we have to let that sit and cool. It's going to take approximately 2 minutes for every pound of pressure, which is going to be about 22 minutes, and then another 7 minutes or so for the pressure to get completely low enough to where this will drop. Now we don't pull that off until that drops. Even though this says 0, there's going to be a small amount of pressure inside there that can potentially cause problems if we release the pressure too quick. So we'll wait until that drops before we move that weight. Okay, we processed for 90 minutes, then we turned off the heat. Took about 30 minutes for it to cool. You'll notice that Ubu here has sat. We're at 0 pounds of pressure. We know there's no pressure in there because this pressure plug has dropped. Now we can take the weight off. Now it's still going to be hot in there and it's still going to be steaming. What you want to do is you want to twist this open and then tip it forward as you open it. Forward. So that the steam goes out the back. Not in your face because it's hot. Now we're going to get the jar grabber and set these jars out here to cool. And these jars are hot. Make sure you get a good hold of them. And as they cool, you can see they're still boiling there. And as they cool, you'll hear those lids. You'll hear those lids start to pop. There's one right there, drawing the vacuum. Sucking that vacuum in, which is what's creating your seal. We'll just let those cool. It'll take a couple hours, but we'll more than likely just let them set overnight. I got a little more canning to do today before I'm done, but those are done. Then what we'll do is we'll pull the rings off of them after they've cooled and put the rings away. You don't want to store them with the rings on them, because if for some reason you don't get a good seal, or if for some reason that food should go bad inside that jar, you want to know it, and you won't know it if you leave the rings on. We need those lids to be able to pop loose if they want to. I've never had that problem. Now that may have looked like a lot of work, and it may appear to be difficult, but it's not, and it's worth every minute you spend doing it for the time you save preparing dinner down the road. Those jars will be good for a year, 2, maybe 3. We're eating 2 and 3 year old canned foods right now, and I'm always amazed at how well this process preserves that food. And the sound the jars make when the lids seal. And then you just label your jars. Now I'm going to show you something else nifty. Dissolving labels. Fancy. But there it is. Pretty simple, really. And I gotta confess, I really enjoy the process. Give it a try.